Well, hello again, all my vintage dirt bike loving YouTubers, and another hearty and very warm welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV. Now, in this next featured video, we're going to check out another open class twin shock racer that soon after its launch in the early 1980s became one of the most popular race bikes of that period. So I do hope you'll stick around with me for the next few minutes as we take a look at John Porteous's 1982 430CR Husqvarna. Now, back in 1981, the mighty 490 Micro and its equally powerful and very quick 495 KTM were said to be kings of the open class motocross tracks. Although cheaper, more reliable and often better performing bikes from Japan were already beginning to make a name for themselves on the European and international tracks around the globe. Now, these big bore open class machines were considered the elite racers of their time, and Husqvarna's answer to taking on the big boys was to pitch in these 430CRs as a way of reply to the big 500cc big bore bikes that were ruling the class in the early 1980s. Now, these 1982 430s obviously weren't as big as the fully blown 500s, and to be fair, they didn't have the arm-wrenching brute power of a full 500, but nevertheless these 430s had a very sweet motor with a very good and wide spread of power that was predictable and easy to control. Of course, Husqvarna motocross bikes in general were always loved for their excellent handling, and some say that many Japanese manufacturers drew their inspiration from these Swedish bikes when incorporating design features into their own machines. But these 430 reed valve two-stroke motors were said to be one of the sweetest motors in motocross for 1982, and they also had a decent Mikuni carburetor which helped smooth out the bike's power through the full rev range. Now, also this 6-speed gearbox had more than enough cogs to keep you at the business end of the racing pack, and while your balls to the wall top riders were trying to tame down the many horses they had at their disposal on a full 500, these 430s were going about their business in a more controlled fashion and still keeping their rider in the pole position at the front of the pack. But nevertheless, these 430 motors were certainly a case of less is more, because if you were riding a big 500, you had to be brave and maybe even a bit crazy to use the 50 plus horsepower that a 500 supplied, whereas the 43 or so horsepower that these Huskies were putting out was a much more user-friendly package, and you could certainly make more use of every cc of its capacity. But these 430s were not just very good engines, they had lightweight magnesium casings which also helped keep the weight down of what really wasn't a heavy bike to start with when you consider the full up weight of a full blown 500 bike. But maybe these 430s never had the trench digging power of the 490 Micro or even the 495 KTM of its day, but a reasonably skilled rider could jump on this bike and ride very well without scaring himself shitless, as he may have done after his first time on a Micro or KTM. But with the bike's light steel frame and that excellent 430 motor, this was a very popular bike with a lot of riders in 1982. Now, these aluminium Husqvarna fuel tanks were certainly a Husky trademark of their day, and when you caught your first glance of one of these Swedish bikes, there was no mistaking the make of machine that you were looking at because of this Husqvarna fuel tank. And John's bike is also showing some signs of a few dents and dings from its days on the track. Now, John's bike, of course, is not a fully original example of one of these 82 430s, but then again, many of these older Huskies are never in their finest original trim and still competing on the circuits. It's really only the immaculate museum pieces that are kept as they were back in the day. Now, unlike other dirt bike manufacturers, Husqvarna actually designed and built their very own suspension forks, and these 40mm units gave the rider about nearly a foot of travel at the front end. And what's more, these were excellent suspension systems even in their stock trim, and were widely regarded as one of the best for 1982. But of course, by the early 1980s, many dirt bike builders were already using fancy monoshock rear suspensions on their bikes, although Husqvarna were still sticking to the tried and tested twin shock rear suspension systems, and the Öhlins piggyback shocks, which were fitted as standard on these bikes, were said to be some of the best in the business. Now here we can see more use of that lightweight magnesium again on these rear brake back plates, and that rear brake, although it was still an older drum affair, it still gave decent stopping power for a big 430 machine. But these 82 430 Huskies were maybe short of a few ponies compared to the big Mico of 1981, but nevertheless it was still capable of digging trenches when it was launched off the start line. And one of the other points of these machines were that they tended to be a bit on the tall side, as they had quite long legs at the front and a good bit of clearance at the rear. So if you were a slightly vertically challenged rider, then these long-legged Swedes were maybe not the bike for you, and it was maybe time to look for you to check out something a bit more suitable. Although in these modern times the big 430 Husky still doesn't have the iconic status that was bestowed on the big 490 Mico the year before, but these were still great bikes with good suspension, an excellent chassis, and of course that superb two-stroke motor. And in terms of its practicality and ease of use, this was an almost perfect open class twin shock race bike. And there's no mistaking, if you can put the right rider on board one of these 430 Husqvarnas, he would certainly still give a bigger 500 a run for its money. Okay, we've had a look and talked a little about John's 430 Husky, so let's now get him to fire the bike up and have a listen to what she sounds like. I'm running out of fucking film here. Well, I hope you enjoyed that very short trip around John Porteous' 82 430 Husqvarna, and if these are the kind of old motorcycles that you like to look at here on YouTube, then I hope you will consider subscribing to my channel to see more. So once again, thanks for your continuing support, and I hope you'll enjoy more of these kind of motorcycles in my next video, right here on Classic Dirt Bike TV.